As of now, the average game developer is stuck in what I call the code hell spiral. I'm in groups of many game developers, both extremely advanced and experienced and beginners. Both beginners and experienced developers post their work or games inside these groups, just for general advice or for playtesting. Whenever I get into one of these games, whenever I test or view any of these games, just even for a quick minute, I've come to notice that almost all of these games are boring, even when the developer put hours into making it. When these developers were given advice or feedback on gameplay or adding certain features that will make it interesting, they'd respond with, "Oh, gameplay isn't that important. I can work on it later, after my game is built." These developers spend thousands of hours perfecting each line of code and optimizing each function. Beginners put a lot of time and effort just to learn code. In fact, code is the first thing that any beginner focuses on. They won't stop until they know each part or each thing about programming. And they always jump on going and learning high levels of code and then making their game. They spend countless of hours sitting on their seat, coding, learning, putting effort, and treat being a game dev as being a full-time coder, just to have their games fail and be boring, just to have their games struggle to even get 3 or 2 players. This is the fate of the majority of game devs. But this set destiny can be avoided. They can have their games skyrocket beyond compare. They can have a loyal and loving fandom that promotes the game, that spends hours on it, and gain in new players, which makes it go even more viral. These same game developers can have an extremely loving fan base that supports and encourages the developer to go further and add updates. But this fantasy-like dream can only turn into reality if the average developer transcends into something greater, transcends into a demigod. But that can only be done if they understand that no matter how good or bad their code is, they'll fail unless they realize that stacking one strategy won't win the game. You need all the right things. Right now, thousands of game developers spend 80% of their time on code and only 20% on gameplay. AAA studios spread out a myth making beginners or developers value code more than anything else. They made developers believe that real games need enterprise-level architecture, massive code bases, and years of refactoring. All beginners want an expert to show them the way, to lead them, and to teach them. But the wrong person and the wrong advice push them into believing making a good game that people will love requires extremely advanced architecture, when that's not really the case. AAA studios created this myth to keep indie devs out of their territory. If you watch a lot of game dev content on YouTube, then you've probably come across the information that indie devs are a threat to professionalism, that they are causing studios to be bankrupt. These game developers that actually made their game go viral and compete against studios are the very few knowledgeable developers who know how to make their game interesting, and who know how to break out of this barrier that's stopping them from being a failure forever. If an indie dev actually focused on other aspects of game development like sound effects, visual effects, models, the feel, the creativity, how authentic the game feels, then anyone who puts effort can get a massive loving player base and go viral. This high-level, expensive architecture boundary is stopping most game developers from crossing the line that makes them a winner. When the majority focuses on more of the code or architecture, then crossing this boundary will be harder. They'll think that the more advanced they get at coding, the better the games they'll produce. And they'll just keep waiting, relying on the Steam algorithm, hoping that Steam will recommend their game. When in reality, getting your game boosted by just Steam recommendations is extremely rare. And even if they do download and play, they'll most likely uninstall and hate the game because it does not intrigue them. It doesn't make them fascinated. It doesn't make them interested. This causes the downfall of most games. And this is the thing that game developers don't understand. Game developers themselves are missing the whole point of game development, of playing a game. Instead of treating themselves like being a game dev is the same as being a car mechanic. Game development is a technical tool taught in computer science. They should treat themselves as a game developer. They should treat themselves like what they are. They should notice and acknowledge that game development that being a game developer isn't the same as being a car mechanic. Being a game developer can be compared to being Picasso, to creating masterpieces, to create art made with emotion, story, effort, and ambition. Game development isn't something you should treat technically. It's something you should treat as an art. Game development isn't just programming. It's a set of skills. Being a game developer is like being a creator of worlds where other people can go, live in, and escape all their issues. That's what making games is about. Being a game developer is basically being everything: a storyteller, an artist, a programmer, a modeler, a psychologist, and a marketer. Players have a low attention span. In fact, you can compare the attention span of a goldfish with the average person, which is literally just 9 seconds. The rise of things like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts killed the player's attention span, and most people who play games are young teens, are college students. And if you target it to that audience, they're going to be kids, which means developers need to create games that appeal to that attention span, interesting games that intrigue and invoke people's emotions. Imagine spending hours on a realistic water system. Players won't see how much hours you put into it. They see the visuals, they see the effects, they feel the emotions that you trigger. They will notice small details. They will notice the behavior of the water. They won't know how clean the code is or the mechanics. And I'm not against clean code. It's good to have your code clean and easy to debug, But this is for the developer. The majority of game developers treat the idea of having clean, proper, optimized code as if it's the entirety of game development. Look at it from the player's perspective. They see a pretty cool water system. For at least 1 minute, they'll go, oh, cool water. They have nothing to do next. They'll get bored and install the game. They'll be like, oh, this is cool. The developer spend some time on it. They won't actually feel emotionally involved in your game. They won't exactly feel connected. They won't feel excited. They'll just be like, oh, pretty. What next? They will only spend money. They will only spend time, and they'll only value the game if the developer strikes them where it will impact them the most. It's either impact the player or forever be a failure developer who tries, struggles, and eventually they'll listen to the people who told them that being a game developer is like aiming too high. That they should settle for a company instead of making their own games. But when actually taking account of the multiple skills of the player's perspective, of how the player's mind works, their games will be extremely popular, loved, and cared for. I've seen the majority of game developers, they start off with those free code tutorials on YouTube. But those YouTubers, they never explained the developer what's really important. They explained how to make the game, sure, but they didn't explain how to make the game as an artist. An artist, each brushstroke counts. Each color they use, it matters in how good the masterpiece will be. As an artist, they spend so much creativity, efforts just on the smallest of details in their art. Game development is a perfect blend of artistry and technicality. To truly win any game, you must stack layers of skill and effort. Everything has its own complexity and requires its own talent. A good example of this is tower defense games. This genre blew up not because its code or structure is rich in complexity, but because it intrigued the players onto a whole other level. The lore collection system made the players interested. The owning special units part made the players feel good about themselves. The genre became famous because it intrigued the players. And another one that literally everyone knows is Among Us. If you've played Among Us, you know that it's not complex at all. Just a few functions and the exact same game will be built. The game became so popular and loved because it appeared in the darkest of times to brighten and to spark a light into people, to bring connection when humanity needed it most. It doesn't have anything complex in it. In fact, it's super simple. But people like it because it psychologically triggered them when moments went dark. The amount of laughter, the amount of fun the people had in the game can't compete with anything. It's like learning to play Minecraft. You can't beat the game just by building and breaking blocks. You need all the skills. You need to be a miner. You need to be a miner, a builder. You need to be a crafter. You need to be a fighter. You need to know how to defend yourself. Then only can you actually beat the game. Even the UI and models can be secondary. The main thing about game development is intriguing the player. Game development, games, they're an escape for players. They're so players can go into a world where they can see, experience everything. They can experience things they can't in real life. It's used as an escape from problems, from boredom. So no matter how good a game looks or how complex its structure is, it's pointless if it doesn't fulfill the need of what a game actually is or what a game is meant for. Even the game's success doesn't entirely rely on popularity. All a developer needs is a small but extremely strong fan base that pushes the game to going viral, that loves the game, that spends countless of dollars on it, that spends countless of hours on it, supports the game. And even by supporting the game, some players gain emotional attachment with the developer who made the game. And to do that, you need to understand how the player's brain works. So when creating a masterpiece, an art, create it with an emotion that you want to trigger in mind. Let average people, like a family member, someone who doesn't know game development, to playtest and give feedback. It's important to let a regular person play because, well, they play with the player mindset. They don't really think about the technical part of game. They just know games. They just know how fun they are. They just know how it should feel. They'll give more appropriate feedback when it comes to gameplay. Creating games is like creating your own world. You build, you use your imagination. You create places where people can move on to, be safe, and enjoy. So make them as enjoyable as possible. Now, that's the end of this video. See you guys in the next one.